Well, hello everybody. How's it going? So today, Manga Studio 5, and we're in this sucker here for the pencil tool. Prefer it over Manga Studio 4, but that's not really the point of the video. What I'm doing right here is actually something I've been thinking about doing. People have been telling me to try doing this a little bit, and that's panel variation. Moving the panel around, kind of getting fancy with it, and I've gotten locked into a way of drawing comics since about the early 2000s when I started looking into Brian Hitch, and I remember reading something he talked about where thinking of the way he drew anyway the Ultimates at the time was a cinematic approach, and it was a lot of widescreen panels, he liked to call it, and I liked the look of it, but as time goes on, your style changes, things change, and what I'm getting into is I'm trying anyway, to be more expressive and cartoonish in my art. For a long time, it was a lot of, I don't even want to be associated with cartoons. I draw comics, and I guess the older I get, or the more I do this, the more I find that it can be very intimate and the same, all in the same sense. So, getting back to my roots a little bit there, so that's what I tried to do. So when you saw me in the beginning there, what I had was a thumbnail that's about no much bigger than my hand, or your hand's probably about the same size, unless you're a freak of nature and you're just massive. So I scanned that in, and now all I'm doing is using that as a guide, and then putting what I call this pencils. They're not tight pencils. You guys have seen some videos I have done where I do get a little bit more in depth with it, and I am finding that is good for certain situations. However, you'll see the level I go into detail here with these pencils. This is giving me all the information I need so that I can do my digital inks. And the major thing that I still prefer to do with the pencil tool here is building up value for shading. And I talk about that all the time. I just can't get away from it. I just can't do it. And so here you can see here we got a character that is a little different than the thumbnail. But that's where this pencil stage comes in, where you can actually spend a little bit of time and think about things a little bit, think things through, and start adding lines that may not have been there. Really quickly, what you saw me draw there were two dots on the guy's face looking at the other guy's eyes, where they would roughly be. And what that helps me do is keep things a little bit on track so that people aren't looking off into areas that they shouldn't be. And right now we're just putting some cables and stuff in the foreground. This guy's laying on a hospital bed, so he's going to be in the immediate foreground, but in the bigger foreground, or the more foreground, I have the cables and stuff with the hospital techie IV drips and stuff like that. And here again, just building this character up a little bit more. I do have my eraser set for pressure sensitivity, kind of like an airbrush. That way it feels like an actual eraser to me. I can erase and still feel like I can build on things that I have before. And I believe I do another pass on this guy after this just to tighten him up a little bit more. So here we go. Starting to work on this character here. This is for the standard. Again, check out thestandardcomic.com for more information if you guys are interested in this book, or at least checking it out. And I have no idea why, but I just thought it would be funny, even though he's in a hospital, have his feet sticking out. I really don't know why. At one time I was going to put socks on them, but I figured, it's a hospital, so that might be too unbelievable. However, if his feet are sticking out, that seems okay. I don't know. Here we go. Just throwing some in here, some lines. This guy is an older gent, so I wanted to put a lot of wrinkles and flabby chins on him. Makes it look a little bit less dramatic, I suppose. It's funny. These two characters here are actually in a previous issue, back when they were younger in their prime, not Nemesis or anything like that, but the standard was your Superman kind of character, and the skunk on the right, he's just a villain of being in that old school age. And it's funny because now that they're older, they're still wearing spandex, and they're more friends than they were, but they're not like allies or anything. But it's cool to have that little dynamic there, drawing superheroes that are old. There's something funny about that. And yeah, so just kind of roughing in general ideas of where my perspective would be. I'm not going to get too complicated with this stuff. I keep the backgrounds generally light, but I need it in there for when I do go to inks, when I set it up in Manga Studio 4, once I throw in my perspective rulers, I need it to be on perspective with something. And it takes no time at all to just gesture in lines. One thing I could say that might help you guys out, and you ladies out there that are having a little bit of problems with perspective, buy a couple comic books if you don't have any at all, and just flip through them if you got some spare time, and pick scenes with backgrounds. And just all you need to do is get a sketchbook or a piece of paper and look at the panel that you're trying to reference from, and find all the straight lines and put them down in your sketchbook, those straight lines. Try to redraw that image. Not the perfect details like all the immaculate windows, just like the big blocky, boxy shapes, the rectangles and stuff. And what you'll find is just by using those straight lines as a guideline, you'll start to see where they all eventually start to meet up at vanishing points. And that helped me out big time when trying to figure out and establish how does 2-point perspective work? How does 3-point perspective work when you're looking up above somebody or below somebody? How does 1-point perspective look creatively in certain situations? So definitely try that out. I know it helped for me. Right there, I'm just increasing the size of the first panel. And the reason for this, I've talked about this before, is trying to remember to not repeat a lot of the same shapes for a head. I heard Todd McFarlane talk about this, and it's something that poisons me all the time. Sometimes I can't get away from it, sometimes I can, but the top head, the size of it, was starting to look a little bit like this cat at the bottom here. So the bottom shot, I can't really get in too much closer, so I figured the top panel would be a little bit more close up. Plus I get to draw some more details in there when we go to the inks, which is kind of cool. He's all beat up and got bandages on him and stuff like that. And here, just working on this guy, again, getting wrinkles all over him, drawing the glasses. Put a little contour line idea there, just to establish lighting. And like right there on his mouth, where all of the side of his lip pinches in, when I go to do final inks and rendering and lighting and all that cool stuff, the pencil stage is just an idea. It's an energy that I'm trying to get across at the time. Like right there, all in his neck, and right there, the cast shadow on his nose and his chin. I'll probably use that as a guide. I won't copy it. Sometimes there's areas like right under his neck there, like if I think it looks good, I'll just kind of carve the shape out. Maybe I'll talk with you guys a little bit in another video about that. But filling that in with black and then kind of rendering it out from there, as opposed to just inking over pencils. That's one thing I just wanted to note real quick too, that these pencils, as you can see, they're not tight at all. Some of you might argue that they are pretty tight. It's not. It's just enough information for me to take to inks. And I was getting a little bit sidelined in, you see the bottom panel there with the guy's face. I would probably even erase that again one more time and go in there with a much steadier hand, not worrying about being sketchy and trying to get as much energy in there as I can, and really figure out where the line weight should be and things like that. That's great. It does give you, a better thing to ink if you're not confident in your inking, or if you feel like you're not 100%, like, if you don't feel that you could take your pencils in a somewhat loose stage and ink them and make them nice and awesome once you ink over top of them, then sometimes it is appropriate to go over your pencils and make them really tight pencils, almost to the point where you could maybe even just put them in Photoshop and play with some settings and make it look inked on its own. I know some people like to work that way. The biggest problem for me as to why I can't do that is it's just a time thing. I find myself, I'm not that fast to be able to spend that much time to redraw something. And the other side of it too is, I've heard people say this, and I have noticed it in my own work, and there's not much you can do about it except try your best not to do it, obviously. But drawing something like this, the more times you redraw it, so the more times you go in there and you have a thumbnail, then you make it a tight sketch, then you go into a pencil stage, then you might go into tight pencils. By the time you get to the inks, that's like 3 to 5 revisions of the same thing. Like a lot of those scribble lines that you kind of have in there that have an energy and a life to them, you lose. So you got to be careful when you do that. The more time you spend refining, it does come at a price. It does come at a very heavy price. One more example would be right now, you got the guy laying in the bed and the guy over top of him. If I went in there and I just started doing really tight pencils and I'm going to change things up, that's cool. But if I erased it like this on another layer and tried it again, but just kept it loose, there's lines in there that I will find later on. So I know I'm beating a dead horse with that. I just want you guys to remember, the more steps you put into something, it can take away from the energy and the life of your drawing. Not all the time, but it has been known to happen. and I would recommend you try it with yourself if you haven't already tried that with you, and see if it actually is something that you could potentially fix. You know, I see a lot of guys drawing cartoons and really energetic things, and they all turn out really awesome. And a lot of them, like, they might even have just this gesture that I have right down right now, and just ink over top of that. So a lot of practice comes into play for that stuff. That's, I want to say, advanced kind of thing, but it is, once you've been drawing for a while, that stuff does become more evident, and you are able to do that. But anyway, so I don't think there's much to talk too much about what's going on. Just building up forms and shapes, trying things not to look weird. I know his arm is probably too long there. I don't know if I address it now, but seeing it, I will change it, because it does look, that bicep is beastly long. And yeah, putting in some crazy faces and stuff. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. Take care. Keep reading comics. Keep making comics. And I'll see you next time.